You know, Travis, when you told me you wanted to do a 70s Killer Ant versus episode, I was a little skeptical because what can you really get out of two Killer Ant movies from the 1970s? Turns out, Killer Ant movies from the 1970s are weird.
And in some strange bit of cosmic serendipity, they're weird in some of the same ways. But the most fascinating thing is the ways in which they're different.
Greetings, loyal listeners and new recruits. I'm Drew Deach.
I'm Travis Newton.
And this is GenreVision.
GenreVision is a weekly movie club where we discuss horror films, action movies, fantasy flicks, sci-fi cinema, and more.
And this week...
Stick with it. Roll with it.
Oh, yeah, I liked it. And this week, we are doing a Killer Ants from the 1970s double feature at the request of none other than Travis Newton. It's Empire of the Ants versus Phase 4. We're not going to spend a whole lot of time on Empire of the Ants, I don't think. But one of the things I'll say about Empire of the Ants was it was mostly a very welcome back to Earth kind of experience.
Oh, absolutely. This was kind of like, oh yeah, I immediately know what this is. I understand the context of it just from watching the first few scenes. You know, it was like, yeah, okay, I know what kind of ride I'm in for. Now, that's not to say that Empire of the Ants doesn't offer a few surprises. It certainly does, and we'll get there. But to start with, this is such a paint by numbers sort of story. You know, we see one of the first things we see is kind of like a faux nature documentary where they're talking about just how crazy powerful and smart ants are. They even use aphids like cattle. Interesting. That might come up again later.
Yeah, so Empire of the Ants is a Burt I. Gordon directorial effort. He is known as Mr. B.I.G., Mr. Big, because he made a whole bunch of movies that factored in giant antagonistic forces.
The Spider, the Cyclops, yeah.
Yes, the War of the Colossal Beasts, the Attack of the Puppet People.
King Dinosaur.
The beginning of the end with giant killer grasshoppers, all sorts of stuff. I mean, as Charles Band is to tiny little things, be they puppets or anything, Burt I. Gordon is to very big things. And this is another one of his big attack movies, this one being Ants, pretty much a in name only adaptation of an H.G. Wells story. Pretty much just paid the rights to use the title because it is a good title.
Sure.
And the basic setup being that a whole bunch of who cares are going to a showcase of some land down here in sunny old Florida, where the movie was filmed. So a little hometown pride. And of course, it's like a bunch of bum land. It's clearly a big scam. And it just so happens that a bunch of giant ants are nearby and are going to attack our cast of characters, mostly led by one Joan Collins.
I mean, you look at this kind of neighborhood that they're setting up and trying to sell people. It's like, well, no one would want to live there. Certainly no Travis Newton would ever live there. Turns out I live pretty much like if there's one location that was in the middle of the three towns that they shot in, it's where I live. So everything looks so familiar, and I'm like, yeah, I know where they shot that. You know?
Well, and I'll cop to some bias, and just looking at the movie was nice because it's like, oh yeah, that's all very recognizable in my backyard Florida foliage.
Yep, I recognize them woods. Well, it's not even woods; it's just a fucking swamp.
Yeah, it's like, I know those mangrove roots.
Yep.
Like, in that level, it was charming, but the movie is mostly a very boring, as you said, paint by the numbers slog. And it's not that those paint by the numbers setups can't be fun, but this one, it doesn't use its creatures very well for the majority of the time. There are a few interesting or decent composite shots where they use live ants and some moments with animation, like giant ants walking on a dock to a ship to knock it out.
Yeah, I mean, most of the effects, like it's so hit and miss because all of the effects, except for some very quick close-ups of giant ant heads, puppeted ant heads, are all like process shots where, Burt I. Gordon and his team of like miniature photography people would like build miniature sets, you know, would reproduce parts of things actually shot on set, like pieces of woods or like certain pieces of buildings. And they all pretty much had to be defined by some sort of hard line in the frame so that the seam between the stuff that was shot on set in Florida and the stuff that was later shot on the soundstage, you know, with the miniature stuff, like that it lined up and there wasn't like some noticeable, like, you know, line, you know, like there's a good shot, one of these process shots early on where you're seeing the beach and the dock that leads out to a boat and the giant ants are crawling on the dock. And the dock acts as that like hard line in the frame where they could do the compositing in. It's like stuff like that occasionally works pretty well.
Yeah, it's okay. But to give some context, this movie came out in 1977, 2 months after Star Wars.
Yeah.
Like, I mean,
yeah.
Now, you know, with that context removed, we can kind of take it as it is. But as an effects film, it had to look like the just cheapest of throwbacks to people at the time. And you know, it's unfortunate because, like you said, I think a lot of those moments, they're good. Like, they're not great, but it's like, yeah, that's fun and kind of what you expect from this movie. The puppet ants, unfortunately, don't get enough of a good close-up or framing. Pretty much every time we see them, they are in extreme close-up and the camera is vigorously moving up and down, left and right to try and give some sense of momentum and force to the ant.
Yeah, evidently the ant heads weren't really articulated at all. They didn't have any kind of motion in the mandibles or, you know, any kind of discernible like performance thing that they could do. Like, it was just all sort of static. And to compensate for that, you see them in short bursts, very close up. And of course the camera is shaking like they're trying to, like it's on fire and they're trying to put it out. It's just nuts.
Yeah, so that's not great. There's pretty much nobody in the ensemble that makes a strong enough impression as a character, with the exception of I just referred to his grandpa. He was just very funny on his own, but even then, nothing really super memorable. The only memorable character, unfortunately, is the one that they paint to be the most despicable. He is eventually dealt with by an ant, and again, his death scene should feel more satisfying, but it doesn't. Really, the majority of this movie is exactly what we expected it to be, and never tipped one way or the other. And that's kind of where a lot of the disappointment set in. Was like, it's not doing anything that's really knocking my socks off or pulling the rug out from under me, but it's also not like failing in interesting ways.
No, it's very expected. It actually feels like a movie kind of out of time. This feels like a movie they could have easily made 20 years prior with the same methods of effects, the same, you know, process shots and compositing. The same kind of big fake ant. The only things that kind of place this in time as far as the 70s go are like, it's a little bit bloodier in moments. There's a little bit more gruesomeness to it. And it's a little sexed up. You know, Joan Collins plays this character. You know, when we first meet her, she says just how good in bed this guy is. You know, if you keep laying me like that or whatever it is, it's like, oh, okay, this is not going to be a chaste experience. It's going to be a little horny. Okay. So that kind of places it in the 70s. But like, if you remove those few elements, like this would easily be a 1950s movie. If you desaturated it, you know, it's like, yeah, okay.
So I was honestly willing to write the movie off and mostly do so for our discussion until the third act kicked in.
Yeah.
And this is where things got in, because we eventually, our surviving heroes find this redneck couple in the swamp, and they're acting weird.
Yeah, well, the characters have an important realization before that. And the characters, as they're like going down the river in the swamp trying to escape the ants, they eventually have this realization that the ants are leading them somewhere, that they're being herded by the ants. It's like, oh, okay, that's an interesting idea. I kind of like that.
Right.
And it's just when you think like, all right, we've defined like what is going to happen inevitably in Act 3 is like, we're going to go further down the river and further into ant territory. But no, the movie takes a left and we meet this like weirdo redneck couple and things get pretty interesting from there.
They escape the swamp and escape the ants and are able to make it into Fort Pierce or Belle Glade, one of the two.
Vero Beach, something like this, something with a downtown.
Yes, something with a downtown. And they're, you know, going places and asking for help. And Travis and I both were like, did this turn into a different movie? Like, what's going on here? This is weird.
Yeah.
Like, there's something off here.
Suddenly it turns into like a town conspiracy movie, like a creepy town, like, oh, that everybody seems to be in on something, but we don't quite know what it is. And they play some interesting moments there. I think primarily with some local actors that do some interesting work. Like there's the girl at the car rental place who just seems to be on like this weird autopilot. And funnily enough, it kind of works in the performance's favor.
Well, especially in hindsight.
Yes.
When we know what's going on.
Yeah.
But yes, they're telling people like, look, they're talking to the sheriff, who's a very celebrated character actor. And they're like, look, we know you're crazy. It's going to sound crazy, but there are these giant ants and they killed some of us and everything. And the sheriff's like, all right, I'm going to go and take care of that, do something. And they're trying to rent a car and they can't seem to get a car to leave. Mm-hmm. And there's this weird vibe in town. And all of a sudden it's like, yeah, this turned into a Town with the Secret movie. And there was no real sense or establishment of that early on. And then it turns out that, they see the sheriff going into another building and like, he said he was going to go get help. He's not doing anything. What's going on? So then they steal a car and try to escape, only to be blockaded by the police on the road and crashing into a sugarcane field and like some little puddle, some little pond. And they're getting taken in by the police and the townspeople. We're like, okay, lean in. What's going on here?
Yeah. So the big reveal is that this is a sugar town, which there are many, in that stretch between you and me, there is Lake Okeechobee in the middle of Florida. And on the south side of Lake Okeechobee, on the southern shores of Lake Okeechobee, we have these towns, Belle Glade and Clewiston. And they are big, big sugarcane towns. When I drive to you taking that route, you just got miles and miles you just got miles and miles of sugarcane fields.
Yeah, when I've made that drive over to the East Coast, I always end up going through Belle Glade, and it's like, yep, it's just sugarcane.
So
like, tons of it.
Yeah, and it's a funky old part of town, and it's only gotten funkier and older.
Yes, yes, it has. It does. It feels like a town out of time.
It is, yeah. So this felt like a very accurate representation of what these Florida sugar towns are like, and eventual reveal that the sugar town is set up as a way to keep the giant ant queen fed, and the ant queen farts out this toxic gas that mind controls everybody and turns them all into mindless drones. It's like, holy shit, this took a delightful turn into Cuckoo Town.
Yeah, that last act kind of saved the movie for me.
Yes. Yeah. I think if it had gone the like completely predictable route, I think this would be an easy write-off as like, it's just, schlocky crap that nobody needs to see. Because that was kind of the impression, like after looking at some of the reviews, I think it's got a 6% on Rotten Tomatoes. It's like, I'm not confident this is going to really ring my bell, but that last act got something going on.
It was so weird. It was such a weird left turn that it made the movie memorable to me. Like I'll never forget it now because of that weird left turn. And in a lot of ways, I think Empire of the Ants and our other movie, Phase 4, both have extremely weird directions they go by their ending, but Phase 4 does the proper work to build that weirdness.
Yeah, well, I mean, Phase 4 came out, how many years earlier?
74.
Okay, so it was 3 years earlier before Empire of the Ants came along. And Phase 4, not to jump the gun too heavily, but it has a similar kind of ending where it's like, humans being slaves to this new race of ants, right? And so comparing these two movies now is kind of like, Empire of the Ants kind of took Phase 4's ending and made it more tangible instead of like going into the psychedelic.
It did the B movie version of the ending. Like, and because Empire of the Ants is a B movie, but that doesn't mean
it's an ant movie. Come on.
That doesn't mean that it isn't a weird ending, but the ending as presented, it falls into that like that big kind of drive-in sci-fi movie idea.
Sure.
Like it's not cerebral at all.
No, it takes everything that it's talking about and makes it very, very concrete and understandable. There's the queen. You go in the room with the queen. She farts a big smoke cloud in your face. To deal with this problem, you take a giant road flare and you shove it right in the big ant's mouth, and that's how you deal with that shit. In phase 4, all of those ideas, those same ideas, are basically done in abstract, which is really interesting to watch.
Well, I mean, at phase 4, this was one that has been kind of notorious for a long time. It's the only feature directorial effort from Saul Bass, who most people will know as being a great poster and titles designer for things like Psycho and Vertigo.
Mm-hmm. A legendary graphics artist in cinema.
Absolutely. And this is essentially the same kind of story where super intelligent, instead of them being, they're not giant ants in this one, but in phase 4, they are super intelligent ants who seem to have come under the influence of possibly some kind of cosmic phenomena.
Right. Either they're kind of like being controlled by aliens, or like there was a solar flare, or, some sort of like cosmic force has taken control of the ants.
Yes. And they have become hyper intelligent. They are apparently conducting attacks on people across, I believe, the globe, if not the globe, at least the US, as it's implied.
Well, they're talking about like certain regions that have been overtaken by the ants, and this one takes place in a desert region. And I can't remember if they say exactly where that is. Arizona, Nevada, California, someplace out west. But we have these two scientist characters, Dr. Hubbs and Lesko. And Hubbs and Lesko are out sort of investigating these bizarre occurrences that they know are caused by these super intelligent ants. And we see things like in the whole microphotography section of the film at the beginning, which is incredible. The ants have these little symbols on their foreheads, which they did. I mean, that's real. They had to take a tiny symbol and glue it on an ant's forehead. And then you see, in the center of this ant attack, that the ants have like pruned the grass in the same shape. It's like, whoa, that's weird.
Fun fact, this moment where it's revealed that they have made this giant diamond shape in a grass, a field of grass or whatever, predates the crop circle phenomenon of the late 70s.
That's interesting, because I mean, it looks like what we think a crop circle would look like. But...
Exactly. That there's the possibility that this, the original people who carried out the crop circle hoax might have seen phase 4.
Yeah. But I mean, to compare approaches here, everything in Empire of the Ants is very concrete and understandable and very literal. We see some guy in a hazmat suit shoving barrels of toxic waste off of a boat, and then we see the barrel of toxic waste on the beach and it's leaking out and the ants are eating the toxic waste. Story told, right?
Ta-da.
In phase 4, we have 7 straight minutes of macro photography, very carefully directed macro photography of ants, and also a whole bunch of like cosmic abstract shapes that reminded me of Under the Skin, the opening of Under the Skin, where we see the sort of formation of the eye in abstract.
Well, and this is all being set to Pink Floyd ripoff music, and I say that pretty confidently because I believe this came out within a year of Dark Side of the Moon.
That would make sense.
Like it because this, like you're saying, this 7-minute opening, there is no dialogue after the opening voiceover, in which we're seeing this kind of weird cosmic visual, is like it's like an eclipse and a flare. It's just something going on.
Yeah, Dark Side of the Moon was March 1973, by the way.
Yeah, so it's a year after Dark Side came out, which means this was probably in production within a year of it happening.
Sure.
This opening is nothing but ants going around, and what's amazing is this sequence tells a story with no dialogue, and that happens throughout the movie. And
there is some VO,
but for the most part, there is no dialogue going on where we're seeing what the ants are up to. And what's amazing is these ants are, there is a sense of performance from the ants, like that whatever footage they were able to capture and cut together, it cuts together as legit character storytelling with things that aren't characters.
Yeah, there's one ant with the sort of green end on it, and we follow that one ant from like one chamber in the nest to the next chamber, and like it goes to the queen, and we see it presumably having some sort of communication or conversation with the queen.
God, that's so freaky, that sequence to me.
What's crazy, like creepy about it is like how well they managed to accomplish and like get across the idea by just filming some fucking ants, where it was like really functional in Empire of the Ants. Like here it's like, whoa, they really knew what the fuck they were doing here.
Yeah, I mean, they committed to it, and it's a distinct stylistic marker of the movie.
Yeah. And there's no issues of scale because the ants aren't giant here. They're just, regular size ants. And so seeing them in their own habitat, like there's no issue of like breaking suspension of disbelief by having poorly scaled effects. Like it's all so haunting and well put together. And after that first 7 minutes is over, we are really dropped into this world with these two scientist characters. And I was reminded very much of Alien. Alien would come out 5 years after this, but having these kind of, they're kind of schlubby guys. They're a little bit kind of blue collar. And their rhythm of conversation is very relaxed and kind of natural. Like the dialogue isn't very stilted, even though they have to explain a lot of crazy concepts to one another. It never feels like they're doing a whole lot just for the audience's sake. It really does feel like the characters are having conversations.
It feels like in Alien, it feels like these are people at work.
Yeah. Who have known each other a while. Yeah.
Right. I mean, even if they haven't, which, it seems like they have some familiarity, but there's information that's passed on about their background and stuff like that gets revealed to them. So it seems like they've been put on this job to go check out this town and what's going on with these ants and just figure out like what's going on. So they get there and they see like the big crop circle thing. The ants have created these strange monolithic shapes in the middle of the town. We see the ants inside. Like the ants are just so fucking cool in this.
Yeah.
Like, and I'm not like ants are awesome. I have no strong feelings about ants one way or another. So like this movie made me really like, oh man, I just want to see more of these ants. They're awesome. They're so creepy and weird, and they're delivering performances. Like I am able to infer intention, motive, and emotion from these ants.
The effects photography in this is pretty mind-blowing. What's also pretty mind-blowing is the production design, like the design of the ant-made monoliths, the sort of geodesic dome that the scientists are living in. Like there's a sequence where this local farming family is attacked by ants, and they try to go to the geodesic dome where the scientists are, and they, most of them end up dying out in the field around them. The guys, this two scientists in the dome get an alert that the ants are trying to attack. And so they pull a lever that activates this sort of like anti-ant spray agent outside. And there are these huge tubes that like pump out to these spray nozzles, and it's just spraying out all this yellow green goo. And the design of it all is like, whoa, like they put quite a bit of time into thinking like, okay, it's such specificity, I really adore that kind of specificity in the design, where it's like, this isn't just functional. This was designed to be an object of art.
Yeah, absolutely.
That does make it kind of a more hoity-toity ant attack movie, but well, this is the headiest ant attack movie I've ever seen. True.
And the movie knows it. It plays to those strengths. While also delivering, I think, good B-movie fun, like you're saying in that moment when they turn on the yellow sprinkler system. They don't know that this family is out there, and they get covered in this yellow goo that's made to suppress and kill the ants. And there's these wonderful horror cuts of them getting covered in this yellow slime stuff and dying. And it's like, ooh, all right, this is weird and messed up, and I love it. And then I think for the time being, this is my favorite part of the movie. They go and they find that the daughter of the family was able to get into like a little, like a tornado shelter type, like a little basement.
She was in the cellar. Yeah.
Yeah. Cellar thing. And she's alive. So they end up taking her in, but we see one of the ants approach the caked over yellow goo that's everywhere and take a piece of it off with its mandible and then take it back to the queen. And the queen ingests it. And earlier we saw the queen laying the larva for future ants, and it's just a little white looking larva, and she eats the yellow goo, and then this glowing yellow larva comes out of her sac.
Well, and it's not even done that expediently. They really take their time with this kind of stuff. They have this sequence where one ant grabs this chunk of the yellow ant poison and is taking it down a tunnel, and it dies. And then another ant comes along and continues the work by taking this chunk further down the tunnel, and it dies. And then the third ant finally manages to take this thing down the tunnel to the queen, and then we see the queen working at it, and then the queen gives birth to a new kind of ant. And without any dialogue, the movie has told us they are breeding new ants to be resistant to this poison. And it's like, it's like a goosebumps inducing moment where you're like, the movie's telling me all this without having to tell me any of it. It was gorgeous work.
I was enjoying the movie. That was the moment where I'm like, this rules.
Mm-hmm.
Like this was a turning point of like, this movie is so confident in how to tell this kind of story and do it in a stylistic way, do it with real character. Like it's a movie that feels unto itself. And that's really, really cool for a movie that could ostensibly just be kind of a paperback from hell story that I would probably still enjoy.
Right. The posters kind of make it out to be that.
Right. But the movie continues to go a lot of weird places. We continually see that corpses that the ants have killed have these 3 holes drilled into them.
Mm-hmm.
And an ant will pop out, like when they find the corpses of the family in the goo, they look at their hand and there's these 3 holes in their hand and an ant crawls out of it. It's like, what are they doing? Like they're burrowing inside these things. What? There's so many. I think as an effects movie, this is a must-see movie.
For sure. Yeah. There's some incredible rear projection stuff in this. Like whenever they have to do an incredibly detailed close-up of an ant and have a large human in the frame at the same time, they will rear project the, shot of the person, behind the ant, and it looks great every time. It's makes for some really, really cool stuff, cool shit.
Mm-hmm.
Just all the opticals are wonderful.
But what this eventually turns into is kind of a Jaws setup in terms of, the last stretch of Jaws when they're out in the orca, is that we have these 3 people who are under siege from some kind of natural enemy that's clearly intelligent.
Yep. They're basically stranded.
Yes. And in that we get, I think, even, and this predates Jaws too, that there is a kind of expected character drives that happen in this stretch where Hubs, played by Nigel Davenport, who's the one who's very much about, like, he seems obsessed by the ants from the get-go. And he's also the one who's very callous. Like when he comes out and they're looking at the dead bodies, he's extremely just like, people die sometimes.
Yeah. A chilling line, really chilling. And it could come off as really funny because of how flippant it is, but you're like, this guy's fucked up.
It establishes him as the, like, I only care about the goal that I've set for myself character. Everybody else is expendable. I don't care about, I'm functionally emotionless for the majority of the role, but he's the one who's he very clearly admires the ants. Like, he talks about how their society is so perfect. He's like, think about it. There's no, focus on the individual. It's all for the unified collective.
Yeah.
And like they are able to communicate that with no dissension or anything. And it is that moment of, it's like, oh, what a beautiful creature. I admire its purity. Like I said that when we were watching, I was like, this Hubs guy, he's got big Ash from Alien energy.
He does. He also does some secretive stuff. He gets bitten by one ant early on, and you can see him sort of hiding the wound from time to time. Eventually it gets to the point where he can't hide it because his hand is so swollen. And you think like, oh, the ants planted eggs or something in there. We're going to see them come pouring out later. I would love to have seen that, but unfortunately it didn't happen.
No, I think it's more so that, not in a literal sense, but in a figurative sense, that he has been infected and weakened by the ants, and therefore his thinking about them changes from being purely scientific and analytical to hating them.
Sure. Yeah. Well, also kind of reverent of them as well. He has a kind of begrudging respect for them.
Yes. After he gets bitten, he's all about like, I have to destroy them. I have to find the queen and I have to kill her. Whereas Lesko, played by Michael Murphy, is still like, no, we need to try and communicate with them.
Right.
Like,
all the while he's been trying to figure out the ant language and trying to see if he can send messages to them, which is pretty cool. Like he figures out that he can, basically tell ants where to go by mimicking their communication protocol. He
can't tell them. He's able to decipher their language by visualizing them in certain kind of line and wave forms, and saying like it's a bunch of commands that we understand, like stop, go, turn, like that, like that kind of stuff. And so in doing that, he's trying to eventually compose something that he believes will be able to communicate to the ants. Whereas Hubs he's just devolving more and more into like trying to kill them. When he sees one in the lab, he just ends up tearing the lab to pieces trying to kill this one ant. This is all it's so great. But eventually it does kind of have to become the movie that I think people expect it to be, which is like, yeah, there's some more like ant attack scenes. Like there's what's the animal that they see it just swarm over and eat really quickly?
Oh gosh, I forget exactly what it is, but
there's some animal that they have to see it like with the sped up photography.
It's a rat. It's a rat.
Yeah. But the stuff that I love is like Hubs decides like, well, how am I gonna get the ants' attention? How am I gonna get them to do something? So he blows up their monoliths that they're in with this handheld grenade launcher, and in doing that, the ants then react. And they build these smaller little monoliths that have reflective surfaces on them, and they make them surround the geodesic dome so that the sun reflects onto the dome and increases the temperature in there, making it very uncomfortable for them, but also it shorts out their computers.
Right. Yeah, it makes it hot enough so the computers can't operate. So
it's so cool. That's such a fucking cool idea.
It's really intricately plotted when it's at its best. Like no joke here. It's real fucking good. But there is a fairly long stretch where the movie gets a little sleepy, and it's like, oh, the movie wants to get across this feeling of like, yeah, they're being like smoked out basically, where it's like the ants are cranking up the heat, and
yeah, this is the long siege section,
right?
Like where it's like, all right, we're under siege, we can't go anywhere, and they're still being, for the most part, functionally, as far as the story is concerned, trying to attack the science and the understanding of what's going on.
Yeah, because there is like a sequence where they're able to win against the ant siege in that section, but they know something else is coming, like something big is coming.
Yes, it could, because Lesko is able to transmit a sound that disrupts the ants and causes their little reflector monoliths to start to tumble a bit.
Yeah, it's some kind of like, white noise that he manages to blast at a specific volume that disrupts and kills a bunch of ants. Like there's this crazy scene where all of these dead ant bodies are lined up in perfect rows, and you can see that the ants are mourning all the dead that they lost to the white noise attack. Nutty. So nutty, but really cool.
I don't know how they did that. Like, I understand, like, okay, we can line up ant corpses ourselves, but we see an ant carrying another ant into this room with a bunch of the other ant corpses lined up like it's a graveyard. And and then we see other ants surrounding them looking like those ants are mourning. It's nuts. I can't believe that stuff works. And like, it doesn't just work. It's great.
Yeah. I mean, it's a really tight understanding of what, and this is a very film school term here, the Kuleshov effect, which means that the image we see before has an impact and gives context to the image we see next. So we see a certain reaction shot and we go, they're reacting in this way. And it's because of what comes before. And so it's like, okay, the editor knew, and whoever did the storyboards knew, and whoever shot the sequences, like they all knew what they needed to get in order to tell the story without dialogue, at least on the ant side. It's pretty brilliant. And the ending only gets wackier and nuttier.
Yeah. So eventually, Hubs is convinced like he's going to go out and he's going to kill the queen. He knows where she is. He walks out, and of course the ants have set a pit trap for him that he falls into. Fucking great. Laughed at that. It is funny. But eventually the girl that they picked up that survived after the family was killed, Kendra, who's played by Lynn Frederick, she seems to be taken by the ants because they get this communication eventually from the ants, and it is just these geometric shapes. It's like a circle inside of a diamond, and then there's a dot inside of the circle.
Mm-hmm.
And Lesko's trying to figure out, like, what is it? Like, what are they saying that they want something? Like, the circle is us, and there's one thing in there. Like, who is it? A person? Do they want one of us? And Kendra believes that it's her. So she's like, I'm going to save you, and I'm going to stop, what's going on by giving myself over to them. And she runs out and gives themselves over. And then, Hubs gets killed, and Lesko believes that it's like, well, what's going on? So eventually he decides to go down into the pit to see the queen, and there's this sand pit there. And
yeah.
Out of the sand pit rises Kendra.
So this incredibly chilling moment sees this union of Kendra, who is now a full ant slave, where these two, they embrace, and the movie basically dissolves into some psychedelia. Now, there are two versions of this.
Well, in both versions and before this, it's important. Lesko outright states, us. They wanted us. Then we get into the ending of Phase 4, which, for some context, there was for years discussed an original ending that was cut from this movie. It did get discovered many, many years later. It is out there. I believe it was included as a special feature on one of the physical releases. The ending that we see in the movie mostly gets the same idea across. It is that Lesko and Kendra are joined together. It is by the machinations of the ants, and somehow they have transcended, as we see this weird psychedelic imagery of, the sun and all this kind of stuff. And through voiceover from Lesko, he's saying that it's like, we were being, essentially ordered to do something. We don't know what, but they'll tell us when they want to, and we'll know. And it's like, okay, so essentially Lesko and Kendra are the Adam and Eve of this new evolution in humans through these ants. But then there's the ending that was cut, which gets into it, but it gets deeper into it and also gets way fuckier.
So, I mean, it's the same basic idea in the cut ending, but they go on much, much longer with this like psychedelic montage stuff.
They get to see a vision of the future. Yes,
where they get to see humans living in these like very abstract landscapes and these geometric shapes, and they get to see this sort of like humans living in harmony with nature, but like you see a man swimming, juxtaposed with a frog swimming, and it's like, okay, I'm getting what this movie is putting across, but what I love is just how into abstraction Saul Bass is as a filmmaker here, where even when he's filming something that isn't abstract at all, he'll do things with the camera to make the shot seem sort of alien, somehow turn it on its head, present things as if they were abstract, like zoom in a little further than we might expect, or, disrupt what we think the field of view should be, or like how shallow the depth of field should be, just make things slightly unreal, really focus on shape and silhouette and design. That, I think, above all, is what makes Phase 4 so unique, is that really keen sense of direction.
Oh yeah.
Because you could take this same story and really dumb it down and get something a lot like Empire of the Ants. But that sense of turning this into a psychedelic, kind of a psychedelic gem, with really precise cuts, that's what makes Phase 4 special. Now, this whole approach has not won it a whole lot of acclaim, although it has a cult following, but like critics can't really agree on whether or not this is a good movie.
No, I mean, the best description I can come up with it is like, what if Philip Dick made a killer ant movie?
Kinda.
Like that's the best way I could sell it to somebody. Because obviously in a versus scenario, Phase 4 just wipes the floor with Empire of the Ants. There's no question.
Yeah.
Empire of the Ants has that really interesting ending turn, and it's a solid but unremarkable giant ant movie. Phase 4 is something that it's like the hype that I had actually heard about this being like, no, you got to see this. This is something unique. It is totally deserved.
For sure. And to have these two movies with essentially different versions of the same ending, you know, I love the variety of being able to get, like, one is a fairly run-of-the-mill animal attack movie that goes somewhere more interesting. And then one is a totally different approach where it's like, okay, we're gonna make this an art house psychedelia movie. Both have their own merits, but like in versus, Phase 4 kicks the ass of Empire of the Ants.
I'd watch Phase 4 again right now, honestly. Like,
really? Okay.
It's one that's really in my head. I should rephrase it more so than if Philip K. Dick made a Killer Ant movie. This is if Arthur C. Clarke made a Killer Ant movie.
There you go. You go.
Because that is the closest understandable comparison that I can make to Phase 4 is 2001: A Space Odyssey. It's really, and I mean that, but you know what? Like, strong take here. I might like Phase 4 more than 2001.
That is a strong take. I guess also it's kind of like animes where so many anime movies by the third act just like melt down into psychedelia and voiceover. It is kind of like that. So if you like that sense of design and, you know, strong focus on visuals, and kind of losing a familiar footing, you know, this movie has this sort of like crowded in paranoid feeling, with a sci-fi design that also feels quaint, but at the same time, like, there's a retro future aspect to it that's like, oh, this is sort of timeless in a way I love. I think it's pretty damn good. It's a little slow in the middle in some parts, but other than that, fucking top marks.
But I think it earns it. In all honesty, I think it earns that slowness. Like, sure. It's not my favorite stretch of the movie, but it's not like the movie derails or like, oh, I'm getting bored. It was like, no, I was still in, but
no, it actually kind of adds to the druggy hangout vibe of the movie, which is not bad. It's not a bad thing.
But I think we can head over to the shelf where we'll pick some movies that act as good pairings or maybe substitutions for our main topic. And the shelf is a collaborative thing that we do here on GenreVision, so we encourage you to go to GenreVision.com and comment on the post for this episode with your own shelf picks for Empire of the Ants in Phase 4, and we will feature them on next week's episode. Travis, what are you going to pull off the shelf for Empire of the Ants and Phase 4?
Well, if you're looking for something that is, in the same vein of like, oh, it's a giant creepy crawly, that has some like spacey cosmic stuff going on, but it's also funny and corny. Like, you got to see the Giant Spider Invasion. It's not a good movie, but it's also kind of a must-watch MST3K episode. Like, it's that kind of movie. This came out in 1975. It was directed by a guy named Bill Rebane, who was a Wisconsin filmmaker. He made another low-budget MST3K movie called Monster A Go-Go, which is a fucking hilarious episode if you've never seen it.
Terrible movie.
Oh, yeah.
An impossible movie.
I just recently watched a Giant Spider Invasion based on one of the things Drew told me. And I was really happy to see, like, there's a sound effect, like this beam that comes down from space to, like, beam spiders down to the earth. Power Man 5000 sampled that sound in their cover of Good Times Roll on Tonight the Stars Revolt. So I was quite, instantly smitten with the movie for doing that. Also, it has Alan Hale Jr. as the local sheriff. And if you don't know who Alan Hale Jr. is, he's the skipper from Gilligan's Island. So
that's true. And Giant Spider Invasion, also one of the top grossing films of 1975.
True. Very true. Strangely enough. Again, not good, but stupid fun. Like some of the big spiders are so funny. You had said that they were basically like Volkswagens with legs on them.
Yes.
That rocks. I think that's so great. Anyway, that is my shelf pick. What are you pulling off the shelf?
I'm going to pull off another 1970s insect attack movie that goes to some very weird places and ends up being kind of an insect apocalypse movie. And this is one you and I have watched for the first time recently. This is Bug, also from 1975. We both picked 1975. Something was going on, man. Something was in the water.
There was a bunch of insect fear movies in that.
Yes. And Bug was one that had always interested me because it was directed by Jano Schwartz, who did Jaws 2. Go listen to our Finflix Jaws 2 episode. And never saw it. I just knew it by the poster where it's like, it's a lady and there's a big cockroach on her face and it's exploding. And I was like, okay, I'll see that one day, but never pulled the trigger on it until Travis Travis got me to. We watched it together. Bug, I kind of loved Bug.
I mean, it's a crazy movie that, like Empire of the Ants, takes a turn for the unexpected.
Empire of the Ants, giant ants. Okay, I get that. But Bug's whole deal is that these are prehistoric cockroaches that were buried deep in the Earth's crust that have been unearthed by an earthquake. They are set up in the beginning to possibly be a plague from God. And the whole deal with them is like they can create fire. Like they have these things on their butts that can create giant explosions and stuff. And as you had pointed out when we watched it, it's like the fears that people have about insects and particularly cockroaches never in a million years included them exploding you.
Right. Or just like setting you a flame, like fully engulfed in flames. There's this one sequence where the main character of the movie, his wife is at home. And of course she's like got this big 70s hairspray hairdo. And one of the cockroaches crawls up on her and into her hair. And in like an insect fear film, you're like, okay, yeah, the whole creepy crawly aspect of, it's crawling on me. That's gross. And that evokes a fear and disgust reaction. But like, nobody's afraid that a cockroach is going to set them on fire. I think that's like, I'm afraid a shark is going to strangle me. Like, what? It doesn't make any sense. So this bug crawls up in her hair and it ignites her hair. And soon her head is this giant ball of flame and she's running around. It's so funny.
It's a lot of fun. And I would normally spoil a movie that's, almost 50 years old now. It's old, but I don't want to, because where Bug went in the ending blew my goddamn mind.
Oh yeah. And also some fucking hilarious reveals. You and I were like, this better not. Oh my God, it did.
Well, I mean, yeah, there was one moment where I was like, oh my God, they're going to do this, aren't they? And when they did, I wanted to applaud. I wanted to stand up in my apartment and just start clapping. Like, this is nuts. This is so insane. And I'm so here for it. And the final moments of the movie are unforgettable. Like,
it goes.
It goes. Yeah. So I highly recommend Bug from 1975. So glad I finally, took the plunge on that one and was happy to do it with you, Travis.
Thank you.
But for our listener shelf picks on last week's episode on The Astrologer, Eric Johnson went with The Wicker Man, and I believe gave the nod to the Nicolas Cage version. Stephen Nesbella went with Scarface for another rise and fall story. Hobb went with Black and White by James Toback. Mr. Milksteak echoed your pick, Travis, of The Jerk, as well as The Last Exorcism. And Eric Fuchs went with the film Get Even, also known as Champagne and Bullets, also known as Road to Revenge, which is another one of those ego project, written, directed, starring type vehicles. It's going to be a long time before we do another one of those, folks. So thank you, everybody, for your shelf picks. Love seeing them and looking forward to the ones for next week. Now we do have to do some quick calls to action, but stick around because Travis is going to be talking about a brand new show on Apple TV. And we're also going to be talking about the Marvel show Loki. Now, if you love what we're doing here, we would love it if you went to the Apple Podcast Store and left a rating and a written review for the show. We actually had a couple over the last couple of weeks, and they're, it's not just stroking our egos. Those things help us out way more than you can possibly know. So if you love what we're doing here, one of the best ways that you can help us out is to leave a rating and written review. And if you leave a written review, we will feature it here on the show. Another way you can help out the show is becoming a patron at patreon.com/GenreVision, where you will get access to, I don't even know how many hours now of bonus material that we've got. We do weekly pre-shows for GenreVision. We do extended currently consumings once a month. We do a whole bunch of other bonus stuff for our other shows, and pretty much just it's a very different vibe that we've cultivated. I won't say very different, but it's just a much more personal and kind of hangouty vibe,
and also a lot behind the scenes. Like if you want to hear how the sausage is made, that's where we're talking about it at patreon.com/GenreVision.
Yep. For just $5 a month, you'll get access to all that stuff. For example, when we schedule out our theme months, you can listen to us do that live. We just recorded that for this week's pre-show. Our scheduling, we haven't settled exactly but you'll know what our theme is and the movies we're considering for September. And we solicit suggestions over there at Patreon for those kinds of episodes. So if you want to be a part of that process, patreon.com/GenreVision. Let's do some currently consuming.
Nom 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 nom.
Travis, what's been on your plate?
There's a new show on Apple TV Plus, and I'm sure at this point that I'm the only one in our group watching it. Maybe the only person on the planet. I don't know. But it's called Schmigadoon, which is, of course, a spoof of the musical Brigadoon, which is about two people that visit a Scottish village that only appears to people who need it to appear and then vanishes without a trace. But the two main characters in this are played by Cecily Strong and Keegan-Michael Key. They both played doctors. And there's this, beginning where they have a meet cute at a vending machine in the hospital, and they get into this relationship. And we cut to a few years later, and the relationship is functional, but only just. And they're on a retreat, and as they walk out into the woods, they suddenly find themselves in a 1940s musical in a town called Schmigadoon. And all of these characters in the town are certainly wacky stereotypes of the kinds of characters we see in Music Man, and of course the obvious Brigadoon and Oklahoma.
Yeah, I was going to say Oklahoma. I mean, Oklahoma is essentially Cowboy Brigadoon.
Sure, but there's some really funny targeted jokes about, like, if you know stage musicals, like, you'll get a lot of kicks out of it. But the cool thing about it is every episode was directed by Barry Sonnenfeld, and Men in Black, Addams Family movies. So if you like Barry Sonnenfeld's directorial style, it's there. Now, it's a good deal more colorful and bright than you might see in Addams Family, but that kind of knowing embracing of the artifice and his, like, particularly strong eye, he's a great DP as well. But if you like the kind of stuff that Barry Sonnenfeld directs, like, maybe you'll like the look of this. But I think you gotta like musicals. That's kind of like a requirement to get into this, because it is a musical in and of itself, and a pretty funny one at that. And there's also some pretty heavy involvement from some SNL folks, particularly Lorne Michaels, obviously Cecily Strong. But it's okay. I'm like 3 episodes into it at this point. There will be 6 total, but I could do a lot worse. Anyway, I'm going to pass the baton to you.
Well, this is something we both watched. The Marvel Disney Plus show Loki concluded at some point. Time is a construct. I don't know when it ended, but it ended, and people have talked about it, and I'm not going to spoil anything here. But of the Disney Plus shows, I think Loki so far is the best one consistently. Like, it feels the most like a Marvel movie that was properly cut up into 6 episodes. Tom Hiddleston is extremely compelling and great in this performance. I think the cast all around it is very good, which is, Marvel's very good at that. And the ending, I like the ending of the show.
Are we going to spoil anything?
I think we can say at this point, if you don't want to get spoiled, you can pretty much stop listening to the episode.
Yeah, if you don't want to hear any Loki spoilers, whether they be minor or major, you can stop listening here. That's okay. We forgive you.
But my main takeaway, I don't need to get specific, is that the finale decided to be a 3 characters in a room talking. There's other stuff that it cuts to that's a little bit more action oriented and stuff. But those 3 characters sitting in a room talking about what's going on and what the future could hold was extremely compelling. A big part of that being the actor Jonathan Majors, playing a character who is only referred to as He Who Remains. His performance is very fun, very kooky, but not in a cutesy way.
Right. Not in an annoying way. Like, it's actually really compellingly kooky.
Yeah. Sometimes it comes off as creepy. Sometimes it comes off as very, jesterly.
Fucking funny.
Yeah. Very, very funny.
And like every acting choice he makes is super interesting. Because, the last big bad in the Marvel Cinematic Universe was a 10-foot tall California raisin made out of pixels. This guy's just Jonathan Majors.
Well, and also, Thanos, he had one specific way of talking all the time and delivered every line like it was exactly like the line he delivered before. That ain't Jonathan Majors. Jonathan Majors is loose in this.
He is. And from what we understand now at the end of Loki is there's going to be a whole bunch of different variations on how he could play this role, which opens up a lot of possibilities that, could be cool. We'll see. I just got to, I got to say, like, this out of the shows, I've watched WandaVision. I've watched some of Falcon and Winter Soldier, which is just not my thing. It doesn't interest me. So I watched 2 episodes and was like, eh. This was like, oh, okay, this is my shit. Like, this is my jam. It's Tom Hiddleston being great. The cast is phenomenal around him. Owen Wilson, Gugu Mbatha-Raw.
Best thing about the show, score.
Yeah, Wunmi Mosaku's in it as well. The score is this really incredible blend of well-done orchestral stuff and strings with synths that I don't know if they used any actual theremin in this because the tuning is so perfect. It might be a synth that kind of sounds like a theremin.
But that's what it's trying to evoke.
The blending of the synthetic elements with the orchestral elements, really beautiful. And there's also just like, it's a great blend of all of these sci-fi elements working together in concert. There's a moment in the first episode where Loki looks out upon the vastness of this organization. Was it the Time Variance Authority or whatever it is, the TVA? Yep. He looks at it all and there's like vehicles whizzing around and flying around. And it's like this kind of Jules Verne futurist landscape. And there's this beautiful music cue with it. And you're like, you know what? This is what I haven't had enough of, like in a long time with this Marvel Cinematic Universe stuff. Like this is beautiful.
Like the first chunk of WandaVision is my favorite because it felt the riskiest. It felt the weirdest.
Sure.
This is wacky, but it's still, it's wacky within, I think, the ceiling that the MCU has so far shown that it can reach.
Agreed. I mean, there is definitely a ceiling and like an expected tone, and like there's only so far they can variate. But I like the fact that Loki, because of its format and because of some of the things it explores, is, I would say that it aims a little bit higher in terms of like target audience age. It actually talks about Loki's queerness a little bit. It gets a little bit of a mention, but it's like it's very clear, what Loki is saying when he says that. It's not a whole bunch of euphemisms. I like that the character study, the actual scenes of dialogue with the characters sitting down across from each other in rooms and having conversations about the natures of themselves is like, this is like grown up shit.
Well, and they're actually in rooms, it's not, composited in Tom Hiddleston with composited in, Jonathan Majors.
Right. Or like really boringly directed, like shot reverse shot. No, it's like actual, like really great direction from Kate Herron.
Yeah. I mean, I'm on board with that. It is. I mean, it falls into the trap that all these Marvel things fall into, is that it doesn't really have an ending. Like the ending has to be a setup for another thing.
Exactly.
So, I mean, that's just what these things are now. And so I don't really like when it's like, how's it going to end? It's like, it's going to end as basically a teaser for another thing. Like, so it's not going to have the greatest conclusion.
But, it does actually have a character arc for Loki and Sylvie. And, these characters, we've criticized Marvel movies and actual Marvel comic stories in general for not allowing their characters to change over time. They always return to sort of, a place where we understand that the character is always like, Stan Lee has always talked about this.
Yeah. The illusion of change.
Exactly. The characters don't change. It's only the illusion of it. But this actually demonstrates, a Loki at the beginning of the show. He undergoes a really rapid transformation in that first episode, and it is you've called it a cheat, I've called it a shortcut, where it's like, well, they need to take this Loki and actually bring him up to speed with who the audience knows Loki to be. And we're talking about the Loki that died in Infinity War. But by the end of the series, he is making decisions that other versions of him would not. And it's like, that's demonstrable change. Yeah.
Yes, I called that first episode quick arc a cheat, but I also said that it's like, but I understand why they're doing it. It's not something that I'm like, oh man, this is like a dumb move. It's like, no, I get why this needs to happen. I think it could have happened over maybe 2 episodes, but for as quickly as they did it. But yes, by the end of the show, it's like, no, this has earned Loki's arc, and he has changed, and it has earned the change that we've seen in him. And, there is absolutely wacky stuff. Like that fifth episode to me is like the first chunk of WandaVision, where it's like, all right, are you guys really, really willing to get weird with it? Because the weirdness that we've had in the MCU prior, before we had it, people probably would have been like, this is crazy. A big purple guy's collecting magic stones that can shape reality and turn things into bubbles. Like,
right. 20 years before Infinity War, that would have been unthinkable on screen.
Sure. But at the same token, the presentation of those things have always been in that Marvel mold, which has kept them grounded in some way for mainstream audiences. It's made them buy into these really big, goofy comic book concepts. And that's a double-edged sword. Like, I like that, but at the same time, it also means that, well, they have to kind of sand off some of the edges of this weirdness.
Right. They have to be presented in a certain way, and that certain way is actually pretty narrow, as it turns out.
Yes. And so WandaVision and parts of Loki promise something that it's like, we could get weirder. And that is a promise that I will hope to see fulfilled, but I'm not going to count on it, because by the end of WandaVision, I was like, yep, this is an MCU thing. Like, it's pretty standard issue. It started out as the most different MCU thing that had ever been made, but by the end, it was an MCU thing. Loki, I think, actually has an edge over that because it maintained that consistency throughout and kind of set the barrier of its weirdness very early on, which allowed it. It's like, yes, when you get to that fifth episode, and we said spoilers, like, you're seeing Richard E. Grant in the classic comic book Loki costume. That is one of the best things Marvel's ever done for me.
Yeah, it's fun, and of course it's Richard E. Grant doing fucking great Richard E. Grant work.
Of course, he's having a ball, and it's another like with Loki's acknowledgement of his queerness. It's a small, very small step, but a good step. It's the same thing with having Richard E. Grant be in that direct of a costume. It's like, that's a small step, but it's a good step to showing like, hey, people will buy this kind of wackiness. We can get more goofy with this.
It is like my one fear about all this is like introducing this number of like concepts, like, Loki in comic accurate costume. It's also played as a joke. And there's also stuff like, it's the Thanos helicopter in the frame. It's the Thor frog in a jar for 2 frames. It's like, this isn't Marvel actually reckoning with how crazy and silly their canon is. It's them actually disregarding it and saying, look how stupid that is. How silly that is.
It's possible. I mean, this is all part of this thing where it's like, well, we don't know until we see the end result. And Loki is the first real canon promise of the bigger MCU could get weirder. WandaVision was the best, like, in that regard, because it's like, oh no, these individual things, they can be presented in ways we never even thought of. And that was daring. But Loki does it where it's like, yeah, we're going to ease you all into this. We're, multiverse stuff is happening. We're going to have our cartoon show come out because we couldn't do the super crazy stuff in live action right away. We'll give it to you as cartoons. But those cartoons will be part of the accepted MCU canon. At this point, our hopes and dreams lie with you, Sam Raimi. And I pray to God Marvel is letting you do whatever crazy shit is in your head, because that's, more so than whatever the Spider-Man movie is going to be. It's still going to be, it's still John Watts. It's still going to be in that particular mold.
Sure.
Letting Sam Raimi do a movie called The Multiverse of Madness is the like, all right, if you don't deliver on that title with that man behind the camera, whoo, buddy.
Yeah.
Like, that's a big promise y'all making. And yeah. I'm stoked for it at this point, but
same. We'll see how that goes. But, as far as Loki goes, like, you say it's good. I say it's one of my favorite MCU things now. So that's nice. I liked having that. I re-upped my Disney Plus for 1 month just so I could watch Loki and Luca. So there you go.
Well, normally we would end things with our comment of the week, but we are announcing that comment of the week is going to go away for the show. There's a couple reasons for this, actually. Some of them, honestly, are kind of out of our control. We actually talked about this to our subscribers on Patreon, and we got some great feedback. And honestly, I was kind of surprised. A lot of support for the idea of, being okay with it going away, because this is a great problem to have. The comment section has become way more robust than honestly I ever thought it would be.
Yeah, I mean, the sheer number of comments that we're getting now, even on episodes that we feel like aren't getting a whole lot of, engagement. Otherwise, when we do like really rare movies, it's like, oh, there's still this huge wealth of comments that we're getting. So it's lovely to see that. But one of the biggest reasons that we've decided to get away from it is that Discuss, which is the platform that integrates with our website to offer comments, no longer works very well. We're supposed to get notifications, and I've double checked all my settings, that when somebody comments, I get a notification in my email. I'm also supposed to get a notification when somebody comments a potential spam comment. And the spam filter recently at Discuss has gotten a little bit more strong. For instance, it will remove or leave certain comments that have certain profanities in them in pending and not publish them. I've had 2 instances, I think, where somebody used the word asshole, and so their comment wasn't posted.
And we were not notified about it.
Yeah. Had I had notification that comment was pending, I would have published it, because I'm fine with the word asshole. That's not a problem at all.
Yes. Unfortunately, it's just become a lot bigger and a lot more difficult to do comment of the week. Like I said, that's a good problem to have, but it does not mean that we want to decrease our engagement. We want you all to continue to submit shelf picks. That's not going away at all. The listener shelf and the shelf in general is one of the things that I found most enjoyable about doing the show. If you want to continue to comment, please do. We love our comment section, and we, try to engage with it as much as we can, but it's just a lot, and this isn't our full-time job, unfortunately. We just don't have the time we would love to have to be consistently engaging, especially now that Discuss is hampering us doing that.
Yeah. If we had timely notifications of when we get comments at all, this would be a lot easier. But Discuss is making our job a lot harder. And unfortunately, with our current website plan, there's really only Discuss or Squarespace's built-in comment option, and neither one is particularly good. So we're kind of stuck with what we got.
We hope you won't feel too bad about that, but we do, like what I said, want you to continue to engage in the comments, and we will certainly be in there when we are able. There are great comments on our astrologer episode, which I can't believe for a movie that is extremely not in release. Like, we got a bunch of comments on that. So y'all are great. The comment section is one of the biggest and best surprises about doing GenreVision, because you all have pretty much moderated yourselves for the most part. You've created a really great movie club, which is what we're going for here. So next week, we will be kicking off August, which is our superhero month. And we're going to be doing Superman, the Richard Donner film, and the Richard Donner cut of Superman 2. So we hope you'll join us next week and next month as we dive into a new theme with superheroes. As always, I want to thank you for listening. I'm Drew Deitch.
I'm Travis Newton.
And we will see you next week.
Right here on GenreVision.